Imagine your own hands moving without your consent, your legs carrying you somewhere you do not wish to go. Every muscle in your body is suddenly a traitor, obeying commands from an alien source. You are still there, inside your own head, a terrified passenger in a body that has been ruthlessly commandeered. You try to scream, to fight back, to regain control. But your nervous system no longer answers to you. It answers to something else. Something that has been growing inside you, weaving itself through your tissues, preparing for this very moment. This is not a scene from a science fiction film. For a carpenter ant in the tropical rainforests of Brazil or Thailand, this is a terminal reality. It is the final, horrifying chapter of its life, orchestrated by a parasitic fungus known as Ophiocordyceps unilateralis. The ant is driven to abandon its colony, to climb a specific plant to a precise height, and in its final moments to lock its jaws onto the underside of a leaf in a death grip from which it will never be released. What kind of biological entity possesses such a terrifyingly precise power? What kind of evolutionary pressure could forge a weapon that doesn't just kill its host, but transforms it into a self-piloting vessel for its own propagation? And what does this microscopic puppet master reveal about the very nature of control, consciousness, and free will? The common name for this parasite is the zombie fungus. But the truth is far more complex and, frankly, far more disturbing than any zombie fiction. The answer lies not in a simple infection, but in a sophisticated biological siege, a silent, creeping takeover of an animal's body that leaves the mind an isolated, helpless prisoner. This is a story of an ancient war fought at the microscopic level, with implications that challenge our most fundamental assumptions about who is truly in control. Our story, our investigation into this biological hijacking, begins not with an ant, but with a scientist, an entomologist, and evolutionary biologist named David Hughes. For years, Hughes, like many before him, was captivated by the sheer theatricality of the zombie ant phenomenon. But it was in the humid depths of a Thai rainforest where fascination turned into a driving intellectual obsession. It wasn't just a single ant here or there. As he ventured into specific areas of the forest's floor, he found what could only be described as graveyards. Dozens, sometimes hundreds of dead ants, each one clamped onto the underside of a leaf, approximately 25 centimeters from the ground. Each one was a monument to a successful fungal takeover, a stalk erupting from the back of its head, poised to rain down spores on the unsuspecting colony below. This wasn't a random plague. This was organized. It was systematic. There was a horrifying, undeniable pattern to the carnage. The gripping detail that seized Hughes's scientific curiosity was the sheer precision of it all. The ants weren't just biting any leaf. They were often biting directly onto the main vein or the secondary veins on the leaf's underside. The position was almost always the same, on the north-northwestern side of the plant. The height was consistent, in a stratum of the undergrowth with a specific level of temperature and humidity, ideal for the fungus's final fruiting stage. This was not the work of a simple pathogen causing erratic, disorganized behavior. This was the work of a master manipulator, a parasite that understood botany, microclimatology, and physics. It was as if each ant had been marched to a carefully chosen execution spot. The personal stakes for Hughes became profound. This was a puzzle that defied the known rules of parasitism. To solve it would be to unlock a secret language of nature, to understand how one life form could so completely subvert the will of another. It was a quest to understand not just what was killing the ant, but what was piloting it on its final, fatal journey. This macabre, ordered graveyard was a crime scene, and Hughes was determined to identify the puppeteer pulling the strings. This phenomenon, while scientifically perplexing, is not a recent discovery. It is an ancient drama that has played out in forests for millions of years. The earliest inklings in the Western scientific tradition can be traced back to the 19th century, to the legendary naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace. While exploring the Malay archipelago, Wallace encountered and sketched a related fungus, one he called the vegetable wasp, erupting from the body of a cicada. For Wallace and his Victorian contemporaries, these were bizarre curiosities, strange hybrids of the animal and fungal kingdoms, but the underlying mechanism was a complete mystery. The prevailing belief was simple and, in hindsight, deeply naive. It was assumed the fungus was just an aggressive pathogen. It infected the insect, consumed its internal tissues for nourishment, and eventually, the insect, weakened and sick, simply died. The subsequent fungal growth was seen as a post-mortem event, a fungus simply feasting on a convenient corpse. The idea that the fungus was actively and precisely manipulating the ant's behavior before death was beyond the conceptual framework of the time. It was a biological ghost story, an unexplained oddity of the natural world. The seeds of doubt against this simple explanation were planted in the 20th century with the advent of more powerful microscopes. Scientists could now see the fungal threads, the hyphae, weaving their way through the insect's body cavity. They observed that the behavior of the infected ants was not random, it was bizarrely specific. They left the colony, they climbed, they bit. But the assumption, the easy answer, was that the fungus must be targeting the brain. This brain hijacking hypothesis became the dominant narrative for decades. It was logical, it was simple, and it fit neatly into our understanding of a centralized nervous system. The fungus gets into the brain, releases some chemicals, and takes over the controls. The escalation of this idea into popular culture was swift. The term zombie ant became ubiquitous, appearing in nature documentaries and articles, cementing the image of a mindless, brain-eating monster in the public consciousness. This simple, sensationalized label, however, did a great disservice to the truth. It provided a comfortable, understandable monster, a tiny horror movie villain. But it masked a far more sophisticated and unsettling reality, a biological mechanism so alien in its execution that it would take the cutting edge of 21st century technology to finally bring it out of the shadows. The real story was not about a brain being eaten, but a body being stolen. The journalistic investigation to unravel this mystery required moving beyond simple observation into the realm of cellular biology, genetics, and advanced imaging. The first clue lay in the location. Why that specific spot? David Hughes and his team, in research published around 2011 in The American Naturalist, meticulously mapped out these ant graveyards. They discovered that the zone where the ants performed their final death grip, that 25 centimeter high sweet spot, was a fungal paradise. It possessed a near-perfect combination of temperature and humidity that maximized the fungus's growth and the subsequent dispersal of its spores. If the ant died on the hot, dry forest floor, the fungus would fail. If it died too high in the canopy, the conditions would also be wrong. The ant was being forced to pilot itself to the one place that was worst for it, but best for its killer. This was not a symptom of a disease. It was a feature of a highly evolved reproductive strategy. The next piece of the puzzle was the bite itself. The death grip. It is the ant's final living act. Once its mandibles lock onto the leaf, it never lets go. Researchers, including those at the University of Central Florida, led by biologist Charissa DeBecker, began to analyze the physiology of this moment. They found that shortly after the ant bites down, the fungus destroys the connections to the jaw muscles, a process called muscular atrophy. The muscles themselves are eaten away, effectively locking the jaw in a permanent state of contraction. The ant's head capsule becomes a biological clamp, anchoring its own corpse to the leaf long after death, ensuring the fungus has a stable platform from which to launch its spores. This is a level of post-mortem engineering that is profoundly unsettling. The fungus doesn't just kill the host, it makes structural modifications to its corpse to suit its needs. But the central burning question remained. How was the fungus controlling the ant's behavior leading up to this final act? How was it forcing it to climb? For decades, the answer was assumed to be brain infection. This is where the investigation takes a dramatic turn. In a landmark 2017 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, Hughes and his international team of collaborators employed a battery of futuristic technologies to see what was truly happening inside the ant's body. They used serial block-face scanning electron microscopy, a technique that involves making thousands of ultra-thin slices of the ant and imaging each one, creating a massive data set. They then used a sophisticated AI deep learning algorithm to analyze these thousands of images and reconstruct a complete high-resolution 3D map of the entire host-parasite interaction. They could see the position of every single fungal cell in relation to every ant cell. What they found would shatter the old paradigm. The 3D models revealed that the fungal cells, known as hyphae, had formed a vast, interconnected network throughout the ant's entire body. They had infiltrated its legs, its abdomen, its thorax, and its head. These cells were communicating with each other, fusing together to form a single massive superorganism within the ant, a biological scaffold that accounted for nearly 40% of the ant's total body weight. This network had wrapped around and invaded muscle fibers, effectively creating a system of biological wires that connected the fungus directly to the ant's motor functions. It was a complete peripheral takeover. But the true bombshell came when they analyzed the head. The brain, the central command center for the entire organism, was almost entirely free of fungal cells. The fungus had grown all around it, encasing it in a dense fungal matrix. But it had not penetrated it. It had not infected it. The pilot was still in the cockpit, but all the controls had been severed. The brain was isolated, quarantined, and rendered utterly powerless, while the fungus steered the body from the outside in. According to one of the lead authors, Maridel Fredrickson, the fungus is a puppet master that is pulling the strings of the puppet from the outside. The brain is still in the head of the ant, and the fungus is controlling the muscles. This discovery meant the zombie moniker was profoundly wrong. A zombie is, by definition, mindless. This ant was not. It was a prisoner. The final piece of the puzzle came from the chemical analysis. Researchers like De Becker began studying the metabolome of the fungus, the full suite of chemicals it produces. They found that Ophiocordyceps is a sophisticated chemical factory. It secretes a vast cocktail of bioactive compounds, including alkaloids and other neuromodulators that are known to affect behavior. The current hypothesis is that the fungus employs a two-phase attack. First, it floods the ant's system with these chemicals, influencing its behavior on a broader level, likely inducing the initial urge to leave the nest and climb. This is the chemical warfare phase. Then, once the ant is in position, the physical network takes over, directly controlling the muscles for the final precise act of biting the leaf. It is a siege of breathtaking complexity, combining chemical manipulation with a direct physical hijacking of the host's body, all while leaving the host's consciousness intact but impotent. The revelation, the climax of this decades-long investigation, is a truth far more terrifying than the fiction of a brain-eating fungus. The defining discovery, born from artificial intelligence and high-powered microscopy, is that the brain is left untouched. It is preserved. This single fact reframes the entire phenomenon from one of simple zombification to one of conscious imprisonment. The horror is not the loss of self. It is the retention of self in the face of total physical subjugation. Imagine the ant's final hours. It feels its legs begin to move, carrying it away from the safety of its nest, away from its colony mates. It feels the uncontrollable urge to ascend a stalk of vegetation, a behavior completely alien to its instincts. It is aware of its own actions, but completely unable to stop them. It is a silent, screaming passenger in its own body, being marched to a designated location to be executed. Its last act, the locking of its own jaws onto a leaf, is not its own. It is the first act of the fungus's next life cycle. This is a form of biological torture so profound it beggars belief. This discovery forces a complete shift in our perspective. The Ophiocordyceps fungus is not merely a successful parasite. It is, in a very real sense, a distributed external intelligence. It doesn't need to understand the intricate wiring of an ant's brain. That would be too complex, too difficult to evolve. Instead, it does something far more brutally efficient. It ignores the brain entirely and builds its own secondary nervous system from the ground up, woven directly into the muscles of its host. It is a masterclass in biological engineering. The fungal network permeating the ant's body acts as a single, coordinated entity, a decentralized mind that can sense its environment and manipulate its host with terrifying precision. This is not a mindless infection causing chaos. This is a calculated takeover, an act of biological puppetry so complete that it challenges our very definitions of an individual organism. For its final days, the ant is no longer a single creature. It is a chimera, a horrifying hybrid of ant and fungus, with the fungal will in absolute command. The stalk that eventually erupts from its head is not a tombstone, it's a victory flag. So why does this bizarre microscopic drama in a faraway jungle actually matter? What are the broader implications of this fungal puppet master? First, it forces us to reconsider the nature of evolution and the sheer sophistication of host-parasite interactions. Fossil evidence in the form of 48-million-year-old leaves bearing the characteristic death grip bite marks shows that this fungus has been perfecting its mind control techniques for an immense span of time. This is not a fluke of nature. It is the product of a relentless, millions of years long evolutionary arms race. It demonstrates that life can evolve solutions to problems that are as complex and elegant as anything a human engineer could devise. The fungus has solved the problem of propagation by inventing a self-propelled, biodegradable, perfectly positioned spore delivery drone. The universal themes at play here are profound, touching on the very nature of free will and consciousness. We operate under the assumption that we are the sole authors of our actions. But the zombie fungus provides a terrifyingly literal example of this autonomy being stripped away. It draws a stark line between the conscious mind and the physical body, and shows that the link between them can be severed and usurped. While this specific fungus is highly specialized and poses no danger to humans, the strategies it employs are not unique in the natural world. Parasites routinely manipulate the behavior of their hosts, from the Toxoplasma gondii parasite that makes rats lose their fear of cats, to the horsehair worm that drives crickets to drown themselves. The zombie fungus is simply the most visually spectacular and brutally complete example of a universal biological truth. We are not solitary biological islands. We are ecosystems, constantly being influenced and manipulated by the trillions of microbes that share our bodies. It serves as a humbling reminder that our sense of complete control may be, to some degree, a comforting illusion. As our climate continues to change, the habitats for these organisms and their hosts will inevitably shift, potentially bringing these ancient biological dramas to new arenas. We return finally to that lone ant, clamped to the underside of a leaf. At the beginning of our story, it was a grotesque curiosity, a mindless zombie carrying out the will of its fungal master. But now, armed with the full, horrifying context, we see it differently. We see it not as an empty shell, but as a prison. The stalk that erupts from its head is no longer just a fungal fruiting body. It is a monument to a consciousness that was trapped, a will that was systematically dismantled and overridden. The horror is not in the mindlessness, but in the chilling probability that the ant was aware of its own unwilling march to oblivion. This entire saga reveals a profound truth about the nature of life itself. We tend to view intelligence as something centralized, something locked away in the protected vault of a brain. But the Ophiocordyceps fungus demonstrates that intelligence can be decentralized, that it can exist as a distributed network woven throughout a body, a collective of simple cells acting in perfect, horrifying concert. It is a different kind of mind, an alien form of intelligence, and its methods challenge our most fundamental anthropocentric assumptions about control. The natural world is not just a place of beauty and harmony. It is a place of brutal, amoral, and exquisitely sophisticated warfare. We believe our consciousness resides safely in our brains, the undisputed pilots of our physical selves. But the silent, creeping takeover enacted by the zombie fungus proves that the lines of control can be cut, that the pilot can be locked in the cockpit while the machinery is hijacked from the outside. And so it forces us to ask a deeply unsettling question. How secure, really, is the connection between the mind that thinks and the body that acts?